Nurse adopted 9-year-old boy abandoned at hospital. The next morning, 3 limousines pulled up to her house. The note was folded into a perfect square. Crisp hospital stationery tucked into the side pocket of a child's worn backpack. Sarah Connolly's hands trembled as she unfolded it. The fluorescent lights of Memorial General's pediatric ward humming above her head like an accusation. His name is Elijah. I can't do this anymore. Please find him someone who can die. 15 words. 15 words to abandon a child. Sarah looked up from the note to the boy sitting alone on the plastic chair, small, legs dangling above the linoleum floor. His eyes, deep brown and unnervingly calm, met hers without flinching. Something in that gaze pierced straight through the professional armor. She built over 16 years as a pediatric nurse. How long has he been here? Sarah asked the security guard who had called her to the emergency room waiting area. Officer Reynolds checked his watch. Since 7:30 this morning. It's almost midnight now, and nobody noticed a child sitting alone for over 16 hours. Her voice rose sharply. Drawing glances from the night shift staff at the nurse's station, Reynolds had the decency to look ashamed. It was crazy busy today. Multiple car accidents to school buses with food poisoning. He wasn't causing any trouble, just sitting there quietly. One of the volunteers thought his mom was in treatment. It wasn't until shift changed that someone realized. Sarah waved away his excuses, her attention already refocused on the boy, Elijah. According to the note, he couldn't be more than 9 or 10, small for his age with a mop of dark curls that needed cutting. His clothes were worn but meticulously clean. Faded jeans without a single stain, sneakers with fraying laces tied in perfect bows. Someone had cared enough to teach him to tie his shoes, to keep himself neat, to sit quietly when told, but not enough to stay. Have you called Child Protective Services? She asked, already knowing the answer. Of course. They're sending someone, but with the weekend staffing, Reynolds shrugged helplessly. Let me guess. Tomorrow at the earliest. Sarah sighed, running. A hand through her copper hair, escaped from its practical bun after her 12-hour shift. The thought of this quiet child spending the night in the chaotic emergency room, or worse, being shuttled to some overcrowded temporary placement facility, made something twist painfully in her chest. Before she could think better of it, Sarah found herself saying, I'll take him. Reynolds blinked. Excuse me, I'm a licensed healthcare professional. I have emergency foster placement certification from the program the hospital ran last year. Call Diane Mercer at CPS. We're friends. She'll authorize an emergency overnight placement. Nurse Connolly, are you sure that's... I'm sure the child has been sitting alone in this hospital for 16 hours. Officer Reynolds, I'm sure that he deserves better than to spend the night in an waiting room or some strange group home. And I'm absolutely sure that I'm not leaving until I know he's somewhere safe. The steel in her voice, honed by years of advocating for patients against indifferent bureaucracy, left no room for argument. 40-5 minutes and several phone calls later, Sarah gently approached the boy, crouching down to meet his eyes. Hi, there, Elijah. My name is Sarah. I'm a nurse here at the hospital. He didn't answer, but his eyes tracked her movements with the wary attention of a child who had learned to read. Adult moves as a survival skill. I know you've been waiting a long time. She continued softly. It's very late now, and the people who normally help in situations like this won't be able to come until tomorrow. A flicker of fear crossed his face, the first real emotion she'd seen. You're not in any trouble, she assured him quickly, but you need somewhere safe to sleep tonight. Would it be okay if you came home with me? Just for tonight. I have a spare bedroom, and we could get some real food instead of vending machine snacks. He studied her face with that unnerving intensity, searching for something. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him, because he gave a single, small nod. Do you have anything else besides your backpack? Sarah asked. Another small head shake. All right then. She stood, offering her hand tentatively. My car's not far. After a moment's hesitation, Elijah slipped his small hand into hers. His fingers were ice cold. Sarah's bungalow on Maple Street wasn't much, a small 2-bedroom she purchased 10 years ago, when the neighborhood was still affordable for a single nurse's salary. The blue paint on the porch was peeling, and the garden had gone wild with spring growth. But it was clean and cozy in hers. "Here we are," she said, unlocking the front door and flipping on lights as they entered. Home sweet home. Elijah stood just inside the threshold, taking in the living room with its overstuffed couch and bookshelves crammed with medical texts and paperback mysteries. The space was cluttered but clean, with colorful throw pillows and a few framed photographs, breaking up the otherwise practical furnishings. "Let me show you the guest room." Sarah led him down the short hallway, turning on the light in the small second bedroom. It's not much, but the bed is comfortable. The room was simply furnished, a double bed with a blue comforter, a plain wooden dresser, and a small desk under the window. It smelled faintly of lavender sachets and disuse. Bathrooms right across the hall. "There are new toothbrushes in the drawer. Hospital freebies," she added with a small smile. "Are you hungry? I just realized I didn't even ask if you've had dinner." Elijah's stomach answered for him with an audible growl. A flush crept up his neck, and he looked down at his feet. "I'll take that as a yes," Sarah said lightly. "Come on, let's see what we can find." The refrigerator's contents were embarrassingly sparse, the result of working 3 12-hour shifts in a row. Half a carton of eggs, some cheese that was probably still good, condiments, and a loaf of bread in the freezer. "How about grilled cheese sandwiches?" she suggested, already pulling out a pan. "Breakfast food is my specialty, but I make a pretty mean grilled cheese too." Working efficiently in the small kitchen, Sarah kept up a gentle stream of chatter, not expecting responses but giving Elijah time to adjust to her presence. "I'm not usually this bad about groceries, but it's been a crazy week at the hospital. I work in pediatrics. That's the children's ward. Been there for 16 years now. Can't imagine doing anything else, really." As she sliced cheese and buttered bread, she snuck glances at the boy. He'd perched himself carefully on a kitchen stool, his backpack still clutched protectively to his chest. In the bright kitchen light, she could see dark smudges under his eyes and a fading bruise on his forearm. The sight made something fierce and protective flare in her chest. By the time the sandwiches were golden brown and cut into triangles, the way her own mother had always served them, Elijah had relaxed, enough to set his backpack on the floor beside him. It was a small victory that made Sarah unreasonably happy. "Here you go," she said, sliding a plate in front of him. "Careful, it's hot." She sat across from him with her own sandwich, deliberately focusing on her food rather than watching him eat. After a cautious first bite, Elijah devoured his sandwich with the single-minded focus of a truly hungry child. "There's more if you want it," Sarah said when he finished, already reaching for the pan. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, please." The sound of his voice, soft and slightly hoarse, as if from disuse, startled them both. Sarah covered her surprise quickly, smiling as she made another sandwich. "You have very nice manners, Elijah." He ducked his head at the compliment but murmured, "Thank you," when she set the second sandwich in front of him. As he ate more slowly this time, Sarah ventured a question. "Is there anything else you need tonight? I can find you a t-shirt to sleep in if you'd like." Elijah paused mid-bite, seeming to gather courage. "Is my mom coming back?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. The hope in his voice, so carefully contained but unmistakably there, was heartbreaking. She thought of the hospital security footage Reynolds had shown her, a thin woman in a warm coat, hurrying away from the emergency room entrance without looking back. Sarah had spent enough years in pediatric nursing to recognize the signs of a permanent abandonment. The carefully packed backpack, the clean clothes, the polite, self-contained behavior, the note, agonizingly final in its brevity, no contact information, no last name. Nothing to indicate the woman ever intended to return. But looking at Elijah's face, the fragile hope in those dark eyes, Sarah couldn't bring herself to crush the last thread connecting him to his former life. "I don't know, sweetheart," she said gently. "But you're safe here tonight. I promise." He nodded, accepting her answer with the resigned practicality of a child who had learned not to expect too much. Okay. After dinner, Sarah found him a t-shirt from her drawer, a faded Memorial General Hospital Fund-run shirt that hung to his knees, and showed him how to work the shower. While the water ran, she changed the sheets on the guest bed, her mind racing with all the things that needed to be done. She'd need to call into work tomorrow, speak to CPS in person, figure out what happened next for this child who had appeared so suddenly in her life. When Elijah emerged from the bathroom, hair damp and drowning in her t-shirt, Sarah felt something shift inside her, a wordless recognition, a certainty she couldn't yet name. "All set?" she asked, turning down the comforter. He nodded, climbing into bed with the careful movements of someone trying not to take up too much space. "If you need anything in the night, my room is just next door. Don't hesitate to wake me, okay?" She adjusted the night light she plugged in, a starfish shape that cast a soft blue glow across the floor. "Thank you," he whispered, eyes already heavy with exhaustion. "Good night, Elijah. Sleep well." Sarah hesitated at the doorway, reluctant to leave him alone. "Miss Sarah." His voice stopped her. "Yes. Are they going to take me somewhere else tomorrow?" The question pierced her heart, but Sarah kept her voice steady. "I don't know yet, but I'll be with you, whatever happens tomorrow. Okay, we'll figure it out together." He nodded, seeming to accept this promise, as Sarah softly closed the door, leaving it open just a crack. She heard the quietest whisper, "Good night." Once she was sure Elijah was settled, Sarah retreated to the living room and pulled out her phone. It was well past midnight now, but she dialed anyway. "This better be an emergency, Connolly," came the groggy voice of Diane Mercer, Child Protective Services social worker and Sarah's friend of 20 years. "It is, sort of," Sarah replied, keeping her voice low. "Thanks for authorizing the placement tonight. I got the preliminary paperwork from Reynolds," Diane said, sounding more awake now. "Abandoned at the hospital. That's rough. He was there all day, Diane. Just sitting there, waiting for his mother to come back." A heavy sigh came through the phone. "We're seeing more of that lately. Economy is bad. Opioid crisis isn't improving. Parents reached their breaking point." There was a note, Sarah said. "Just saying his name is Elijah and to find him someone who can take care of him. Nothing else. No last name. No medical history. Nothing. We'll run him through the system tomorrow. See if there are any missing child reports that match, though." If she left a note, she planned it, Sarah finished. "I know." A moment of silence stretched between them. Then Diane asked, "How is he?" "Quiet." Too quiet for a child his age. "Polite, well-mannered. He's not dirty or obviously physically abused. But there's a fading bruise on his arm that made me wonder. He was starving but waited to be offered seconds. Classic signs of neglect and possible emotional abuse," Diane observed. "You know the drill, Sarah. Tomorrow he goes into emergency foster placement while we track down any relatives." Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. What are the odds of finding family? Honestly, not great. If mom wasn't listing a father on the birth certificate and there's no family already looking for him, he'll probably end up in the system. The system. Sarah had seen enough children go into foster care to know what that often meant, especially for a quiet, traumatized boy Elijah's age. Multiple placements, overworked caseworkers, falling through the cracks. What if I keep him? The words tumbled out before Sarah could stop them. Diane's silence was telling. "Sarah, just hear me out. I'm already certified for emergency placement. I could apply for temporary fostering while you do your searches. It would give him stability. And I've got the space. You've known this child for what, 3 hours? This isn't like you, Sarah. You've always been so careful about maintaining professional boundaries. Sarah sank onto her couch, running a hand through her hair. I know it sounds crazy, but there's something about him, Diane, the way. He just sat there all day, not causing trouble, not asking for anything. Like he's used to being forgotten. All the more reason to be careful here. Children with attachment issues can be the most challenging placements. And with your schedule at the hospital, I can adjust my schedule, work day shifts. Use some of the vacation time I've been stockpiling for years. Sarah took a deep breath. Just think about it, okay? Don't immediately ship him off tomorrow. Diane's sigh was heavy with experience. I'll visit first thing tomorrow. We'll assess the situation properly. Run the necessary checks. But Sarah, yes, don't get too attached too quickly. It never ends well for anyone. After hanging up, Sarah sat in the darkened living room, Diane's warning echoing in her mind. Don't get too attached. Sound advice from someone who had seen countless well-meaning individuals crushed by the grinding wheels of the child welfare system. But as she passed the guest room on her way to bed, Sarah paused at the soft sound of sniffling coming from inside. She opened the door gently to find Elijah curled into a tight ball under the covers, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Elijah, she called softly, heartbreaking at the way he immediately stiffened, trying to hide his tears. May I come in? A small nod was her only answer. Sarah perched carefully on the edge of the bed, close but not touching him. It's okay to cry, you know, she said gently. Anyone would be upset after the day you've had. He rolled over slowly, face tear-streaked in the dim blue glow of the night light. I tried to be good, he whispered. I tried so hard. The raw pain in those 5 words shattered something inside Sarah. Without thinking, she opened her arms in silent invitation. After a moment's hesitation, Elijah launched himself against her, thin arms wrapping around her waist with desperate strength. Joe, sweetheart, Sarah murmured, holding him as he sobbed against her shoulder. It's not your fault. None of this is your fault. But why didn't she want me anymore? The muffled question tore at Sarah's heart. I don't know, she answered, honestly, stroking his hair. But I do know it wasn't because of anything you did or didn't do. Sometimes adults have problems that have nothing to do with their children, even though children are the ones who get hurt. Elijah's sobs gradually quieted to hiccuping breaths. Sarah continued to hold him, rocking slightly, humming a half-remembered lullaby from her own childhood. Would you like me to stay until you fall asleep? She asked when his breathing had nearly returned to normal. He nodded against her shoulder, clearly embarrassed by his breakdown, but unwilling to let go. Sarah shifted to lean against the headboard, still cradling Elijah against her side. Close your eyes. Then, I'll be right here. As his breathing deepened into sleep, Sarah looked down at the child who had appeared so suddenly in her life. His face in sleep was younger, more vulnerable. The wariness momentarily erased. Something fierce and protective swelled in her chest, a feeling so strong it frightened her with its intensity. Diane was right about one thing. This wasn't like her. Sarah had always been the consummate professional, caring deeply for her, patience but maintaining the necessary emotional distance. In 16 years of pediatric nursing, she had never once considered bringing a child home, never felt this immediate, overwhelming connection. Yet here she was, already imagining what it would take to keep this child safe, to give him a home. It was reckless, probably impossible, and definitely not what a rational 42-year-old woman with a demanding career should be, considering after knowing a child for mere hours. But looking at Elijah's sleeping face, Sarah couldn't bring herself to care about rationality. Don't get too attached, Diane had warned. But it was already too late. Sarah woke with a stiff neck, disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings until she remembered the guest room. Elijah. Sometime during the night, she had fallen asleep sitting up, the boy still curled trustingly against her side. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains, casting a golden glow across the room. Sarah checked her watch, 6:45 a.m. Diane wouldn't arrive until 9 o'clock at the earliest. There was time for breakfast, for normalcy, before facing whatever came. Next, carefully extracting herself without waking Elijah, Sarah padded to the kitchen and began assembling ingredients for pancakes. The familiar ritual soothed her jangled nerves, measuring flour, whisking eggs, setting the griddle to heat. By the time soft footsteps announced Elijah's presence, she had a stack of golden pancakes waiting and bacon sizzling in a pan. "Good morning," she greeted him with a smile. "Did you sleep okay after, Elijah nodded, though the dark circles under his eyes suggested otherwise. In the morning light, he looked smaller somehow, swimming in her borrowed t-shirt, hair sticking up in all directions. "I thought we could have breakfast, then maybe find you some clothes that fit a bit better," Sarah suggested, setting a plate of pancakes in front of him. "My neighbor's son might have some things you could borrow. He's a few years older than you, but not too big." Elijah eyed the food with undisguised longing but didn't reach for his fork until Sarah nodded. Encouragement. "Go ahead, they're better warm," as he ate with the same careful, contained hunger as the night before. Sarah found herself cataloging everything she noticed about him. The way he cut his pancakes into precise bites, the slight tremor in his hands when he reached for his milk, the bruise on his arm that was definitely from fingers gripping too tightly. "Elijah," she began gently, "I need to ask you a few questions about yesterday. Is that okay?" He tensed but nodded, eyes on his plate. "Do you know your full name? Last name too?" "Elijah Michael Wilson." His voice was still soft but steadier than the night before. "And how old are you?" "9. I'll be 10 in August." "August what?" "August 17th. Sarah nodded, filing away each piece of information. "Do you know where you lived before yesterday?" Elijah's fork paused midair. "We moved a lot." "What about school? Were you in school somewhere?" A small shrug. "Sometimes. Mom usually said she was homeschooling me, but mostly I just read books from the library." The casual way he described what was clearly educational neglect made Sarah's heart ache, but she kept her expression neutral. "You like to read?" For the first time, a flicker of genuine interest crossed his face. "Yeah, I like adventure books, and science ones. I was reading about space before." He trailed off, the brief animation fading. "Before you came to the hospital," Sarah finished for him. "It's okay to talk about it, Elijah. You're not in trouble." He set down his fork, appetite apparently gone. "Is someone coming to get me today?" "My friend Diane is coming to talk to us around 9. She works for Child Protective Services. They're the people who help find safe places for kids to stay when their parents can't take care of them. Foster care," Elijah said flatly, and the knowledge in his voice broke Sarah's heart. No 9-year-old should understand the system that well. "Have you been in foster care before?" she asked carefully. He shook his head. "But Kyle at my old school was. He said it was terrible. Different houses all the time. Some of them were mean." Sarah reached across the table, gently laying her hand over his. "Not all foster homes are like that. There are lots of good ones too." Elijah looked unconvinced but didn't argue. "Will I stay with you?" The hope in his voice made Sarah's throat tight. "I don't know yet. I'm going to talk to Diane about it. But there are a lot of rules about these things. Because you don't know me," he said with that unnervingly adult understanding. "No, that's not." Sarah stopped herself. She wouldn't lie to him. "It's complicated, Elijah. But I promise I'll be honest with you about what's happening every step of the way." He studied her face with that intense gaze. "My mom said that too, that she'd be honest. But she wasn't." Before Sarah could respond, a sharp knock at the front door made them both jump. Elijah's fingers tightened around his fork, knuckles white. "It's okay," Sarah assured him, though her own heart was racing. It was far too early for Diane. "Wait here. I'll see who it is." Opening the front door, Sarah found herself face to face with Officer Reynolds from the hospital, looking grim in the morning light. "Officer Reynolds, is something wrong?" He shifted uncomfortably. May I come in, Nurse Connolly? There's been a development. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. Of course, in the living room. Reynolds remained standing, hat in hands. We've identified Elijah's mother. Something in his tone set alarm bells ringing. That's good, isn't it? You can contact her. Explain about abandonment charges, but also about resources available, Miss Connolly. Reynolds interrupted gently. Karen Wilson was found deceased in a motel room about 10 miles from the hospital early this morning. Apparent drug overdose. The world seemed to tilt beneath Sarah's feet. Are they sure it's her? Reynolds nodded. ID matches, and the motel clerk confirmed she checked in yesterday morning. Right after leaving the hospital. Apparently, she paid for one night, went to the room, and wasn't seen again. Oh God, Sarah whispered, sinking onto the couch. Does Diane know? CPS has been notified. Ms. Mercer asked me to come tell you in person, given the circumstances. She's expediting things on her end. Should be here within the hour. Sarah's mind raced, trying to process the implications. What happens to Elijah now? Have they identified any other family? That's being worked on. There was no father listed on the birth certificate. According to preliminary searches, the department is trying to locate next of kin. But Ms. Mercer indicated that without other relatives, he'll enter the standard foster placement process. The thought of Elijah being thrust into the system, while reeling from this news, was unbearable. Officer Reynolds, I'd like to formally request consideration as a foster placement. I'm already certified for emergency care. And the small sound from the hallway cut her off. Elijah stood frozen in the doorway, face drained of color, eyes wide with shock. Elijah. Sarah breathed, rising from the couch. Sweetheart, she's dead. The question was barely audible, a thread of sound in the suddenly silent house. Sarah crossed to him in 3 quick strides, kneeling down to his level. Elijah, I'm so sorry. I didn't want you to find out like this. He stared through her, dark eyes unfocused. She said she was coming back. I know, sweetie. I know she did. Sarah opened her arms, but Elijah remained rigid, unmoving. She promised. His voice cracked on the second word, and then his face crumpled. This time, the sobs that tore from him weren't silent. They were raw, primal sounds of grief and betrayal. Sarah gathered him against her as his knees buckled, holding him as he screamed into her shoulder. Behind them, Officer Reynolds quietly let himself out, leaving Sarah to comfort the devastated child. There were no words for this kind of loss. No platitudes that could ease the double betrayal of abandonment followed by permanent absence. So Sarah didn't try to find them. She simply held Elijah as he raged and wept, stroking his hair and absorbing the storm of his grief. Time lost meaning as they sat there on the hallway floor, until eventually Elijah's desperate sobs quieted to hiccuping breaths, then to an exhausted stillness. When Sarah finally pulled back to look at his face, she found a frightening emptiness in his eyes, as if some vital spark had been extinguished. Elijah, she called softly, brushing damp hair from his forehead. Can you look at me? Slowly. Those dark eyes focused on her face. I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but you're going to be okay. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually. And you won't be alone. I promise you that. A single tear traced down his cheek. You can't promise. You don't know. You're right. Sarah acknowledged. I can't see the future, but I can promise you this. I will do everything in my power to make sure you're safe and cared for. Why? The question was so simple, yet so profound. You don't even know me. Sarah searched for an answer that would make sense to a child whose entire world had just imploded. Because everyone deserves someone in their corner. Elijah, everyone deserves to be cared about. Before he could respond, another knock came. At the door, softer this time, Sarah recognized Diane's distinctive pattern. That's my friend Diane, she explained, helping Elijah to his feet. The one I told you about from Child Protective Services. She's here to help us figure out what happens next. Fear flickered across his tear-stained face. Will she take me away? Not right away, Sarah promised. First, we'll all talk together, okay? A barely perceptible nod was his only response. Sarah squeezed his shoulder gently before going to answer the door, whispering as she passed, "Remember what I said. You won't be alone." Diane Mercer's no-nonsense appearance, sensible pantsuit, practical bob, ever-present tablet case, belied her compassionate nature. 20 years in child protective services hadn't hardened her. It had simply honed her efficiency. "Sarah," she greeted with a quick hug. "Reynolds told me he broke the news. How is he?" "As well as can be expected," Sarah replied quietly. "Which is to say, devastated." Diane's eyes softened. Poor kid. Double trauma in less than 24 hours. In the living room, Elijah had curled himself into the corner of the couch, knees drawn to his chest. He watched warily as Sarah made introductions. "Elijah, this is my friend Diane Mercer. Diane, this is Elijah Wilson." "Hello, Elijah," Diane said, taking a seat in the armchair across from him rather than crowding the couch. "I'm very sorry about your mom." Elijah didn't respond verbally, but his eyes tracked Diane's movements with the hypervigilance of a child, used to reading adult moods. "I know this is a really hard day," Diane continued, "but I need to ask you some questions so we can figure out how to help you. Is that okay?" A minute shrug. "Would it be okay if Sarah stays right here with you while we talk?" This got a small nod. Sarah settled on the couch, close enough to offer comfort, but respecting Elijah's space. Diane pulled out her tablet and began with simple questions, confirming his full name, birth date, last known address. Elijah answered in monosyllables, voice flat and emotionless. When asked about relatives, he shook his head. "No grandparents?" "Aunts or uncles, cousins. Mom said her parents died before I was born. She never talked about anyone else." "What about your father? Did your mom ever talk about him or tell you his name?" Elijah's gaze dropped to his knees. "She said he was gone before she knew about me. That's all." Diane made a note, then looked at Elijah with genuine compassion. "Elijah, I know all these questions are hard when you're already dealing with so much, but they help us find the best place for you to be." For the first time since their conversation began, emotion flickered across Elijah's face. Raw fear. "What's going to happen to me now?" Diane glanced at Sarah before answering carefully. "Well, we need to find you a safe place to stay while we look for any family members. That might take some time." "I don't have any family," Elijah said with absolute certainty. "Mom always said it was just us. Nevertheless, we have to do a thorough search." Diane explained, "It's the law, and sometimes we find relatives that even kids don't know about." Elijah's fingers tightened around his knees. "And until then, foster care." Diane nodded. "Yes, you would stay with a licensed foster family." She hesitated, then added, "But there are different options we can consider." "Such as?" Sarah prompted, catching Diane's eye meaningfully. Diane sighed. "In cases like this, we sometimes consider what we call a kinship-adjacent placement, someone who, while not a blood relative, already has an established connection to the child." Hope bloomed in Sarah's chest, like a teacher or a nurse who's been caring for them. Potentially, Diane conceded, though it would be unusual after such a brief acquaintance. She focused on Elijah again. "How would you feel about staying with Sarah for a while longer, Elijah? At least until we sort things out." Elijah's head snapped up, dark eyes wide with surprise. He looked from Diane to Sarah and back, as if searching for the trick. "It would just be temporary at first," Diane cautioned. "There would be regular visits from me or another caseworker, assessments, paperwork. But I could stay here?" Elijah asked, voice barely above a whisper, "with Miss Sarah." The hope in his voice made Sarah's throat tight before she could speak. Diane raised a cautioning hand. "Possibly. But I need to be very clear about something, Elijah. Even if this temporary arrangement works out, finding permanent placement takes time. There would be no guarantees about what happens long term. Do you understand? The spark of hope in Elijah's eyes dimmed, but he nodded solemnly. I understand. Diane turned to Sarah. And you? Do you understand what you'd be taking on? This isn't a simple overnight placement anymore. There would be court appearances, home studies, background checks, parenting classes. Your work schedule would need to accommodate a traumatized child's needs. I understand, Sarah said firmly. I'm prepared to do whatever it takes. Diane studied her old friend's face, searching for signs of impulsiveness or naivety, finding neither. She sighed and tapped something into her tablet. All right, I'll submit the emergency kinship adjacent placement request today. Given the circumstances and your qualifications, it has a good chance of approval. But, she added with emphasis, this is just step one of many. And if at any point a biological relative is located, they would take precedence, Sarah finished. I know how the system works, Diane. Just making sure we're all on the same page. Diane turned back to Elijah. How does that sound to you? Would you be okay staying here with Sarah for now, for the first time that morning? Elijah's face showed something other than grief or fear, a cautious, fragile hope. He nodded double quotes yes. Please, he whispered. Then I'll get the process started immediately, Diane promised. Rising to her feet, Sarah, we need to talk privately about some details. In the kitchen, out of Elijah's earshot. Diane's professional demeanor slipped slightly. Sarah, are you absolutely sure about this? Taking in a traumatized child isn't like nursing one back to health. This isn't a 12-hour shift you can walk away from. I know that, Sarah replied, leaning against the counter. But you didn't see him last night, Diane. The way he tried so hard to be invisible, to not be a burden. He's been taught that his needs don't matter, and I can't bear the thought of him bouncing around the system. Learning the lesson over and over again, Diane ran a hand through her short hair. The system isn't perfect, but there are good foster homes out there. And how many placement attempts before he finds one? How many times will he have to pack the little backpack and move to another strange house? He has already lost everything, Diane. You're getting emotional about this, Diane observed. Though not unkindly. Sarah straightened, meeting her friends. Gazed directly. Yes, I am. But my emotions don't make me wrong. A long moment passed between them. To women who had seen too many children hurt by circumstances beyond their control. All right, Diane finally said. I'll push this through as quickly as possible. But Sarah, yes, this path you're choosing, it won't be easy, not for you and not for him. There will be hard days, days when you question everything, when his grief and trauma manifest in ways you can't predict. Are you prepared for that? The question hung in the air between them. Sarah thought of her ordered quiet life, the long hospital shifts, the peaceful evenings with a book and tea, the simple routines she built over years of living alone. Taking in Elijah would change everything. Yet when she looked through the doorway to where he sat on her couch, small and lost, but fighting so hard to be brave, Sarah knew her answer with absolute certainty. Yes, she said simply. I am. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of paperwork, appointments, and careful adjustments. Diane had been true to her word, expediting the emergency kinship placement. A judge had granted temporary custody to Sarah, pending the outcome of family searches and home studies. Elijah's initial withdrawal had slowly given way to cautious engagement. Sarah had taken emergency family leave from the hospital, using her accumulated vacation time to create space for them to establish routines. There had been a brief, devastating trip to the motel where Karen Wilson had died to collect her few possessions, clothes, a worn photo album, a small box of costume jewelry that Elijah said had belonged to his grandmother. The social worker assigned to their case, a young man named Marcus with kind eyes and pragmatic optimism, visited twice weekly Each time, he seemed increasingly impressed by the careful way Sarah was helping Elijah adjust the session. With a child psychologist specializing in grief, the small desk she bought for his room, the gradual introduction to a local school that could accommodate his educational gaps. "You're doing everything right," Marcus had told her during his last visit, watching Elijah carefully watering the tomato plants they'd started together in the backyard. "But remember what we discussed about attachment and impermanence." Sarah had nodded, understanding his concern. The more stable and attached Elijah became, the harder it would be if their situation changed, if a previously unknown relative suddenly appeared to claim him, or if the court decided against making their arrangement permanent. Yet every time Sarah tried to maintain some emotional distance, to remind herself that this might be temporary, she failed. Watching Elijah slowly unfold like a cautious flower turning toward the sun was the most beautiful, heartbreaking thing she had ever witnessed. The first time, he laughed, really laughed. Not the careful, polite chuckle he sometimes offered. Sarah had nearly cried. They had been making pizza together, and she'd gotten sauce on her nose. The sound of his surprised giggle had frozen them both. Elijah looking almost frightened by his own happiness. "It's okay to laugh," Sarah had told him gently. "It doesn't mean you don't still miss your mom or that you're not sad." She didn't like noise, Elijah had confided later that night as Sarah tucked him in. She said it made her head hurt worse. These small revelations came mostly at bedtime. Fragments of his life before, offered like precious, fragile gifts. Sarah collected each one carefully, building a picture of the boy he had been and the mother who, despite her failings, he had loved. Karen Wilson had been young when Elijah was born, barely 20. According to the records Diane had uncovered, there had been periods of stability, apartments where they'd stayed for almost a year, schools Elijah had attended, long enough to make a friend or two. But these had always given way to sudden moves, usually at night, possessions stuffed into garbage bags. She was running from something, Marcus theorized during one of their private discussions. The pattern suggests either an abusive relationship or drug debts, maybe both. The toxicology report had confirmed what everyone suspected. Karen Wilson had died of a fentanyl overdose, likely unintentional given the strength of the batch that had been circulating in the area. The question that haunted Sarah, though she never voiced it, was whether Karen had gone to that motel knowing what would happen, whether abandoning Elijah had been her last desperate act of protection. On this particular morning, Sarah was preparing for a milestone, Elijah's first full day at Oak Ridge Elementary School. After weeks of assessments and half-day visits, he had been placed in a fourth-grade classroom with additional support for the subjects, where he'd fallen behind. "Ready for the big day?" Sarah asked, flipping pancakes, now established as Elijah's favorite breakfast. He nodded, already dressed in the new clothes they bought together last weekend. The Star Wars t-shirt had been a careful choice, something the other kids might think was cool. "Remember, Mrs. Rodriguez knows that you might need a break sometimes," Sarah reminded him, setting a plate in front of him. "If things get overwhelming, you can use the signal you practiced." To taps on the desk, then asked to use the bathroom. Elijah recited dutifully, "And I'll pick you up right at 3:15, by the big oak tree where we met Mrs. Rodriguez yesterday." Sarah had arranged her hospital shifts to align with school hours, returning to work part-time while the rest of their placement process unfolded. Her supervisor, understanding the situation, had been surprisingly accommodating. As they ate breakfast, Sarah noticed Elijah repeatedly checking the Spider-Man watch they bought to help him manage time, a constant concern for a child who had lived with unpredictability for so long. "We've got plenty of time," she assured him, "and everything's ready. Your lunch is packed. Your supplies are in your backpack. Your emergency card has all our numbers." Elijah nodded but continued to fidget. Finally, he looked up at her with those serious dark eyes. "What if the other kids ask about my mom?" The question caught Sarah off guard. They had practiced other scenarios, what to say about where he lived, how to handle questions about his past schools. But somehow this most obvious question had been overlooked. What would you feel comfortable telling them? Sarah asked. Carefully, Elijah considered this, fork tracing patterns in the syrup on his plate. Could I just say she died, not about the drugs or leaving me at the hospital? Of course. Sarah said quickly. You never have to share those details with anyone if you don't want to. And what about? He hesitated, then pressed on. What about you? What do I call you when they ask? The question pierced straight to Sarah's heart. They hadn't established a title for her. She wasn't his mother, wasn't officially his foster mother yet, wasn't quite just Sarah anymore. What would feel right to you? She asked, putting the choice in his hands. Elijah stared at his plate for a long moment. Could I say you're my foster mom? Is that okay? That's perfectly okay, Sarah assured him, ignoring the tightness in her throat. That's exactly what I am. His next question came so softly she almost missed it. And what if they ask if I'm going to stay with you? What do I say then? This was the question that haunted them both, the uncertainty that shadowed every moment of their growing attachment. The court hearing that would determine their long-term placement was still weeks away. The search for biological relatives was ongoing, though increasingly unlikely to yield results. You can tell them that we're hoping you'll stay, Sarah said carefully, that we're working on making it permanent. Something shifted in Elijah's expression, a cautious hope breaking through the practiced neutrality. Really? You want me to stay permanently? The naked vulnerability in his voice nearly undid Sarah completely. Setting down her coffee mug, she reached across the table to take his small hand in hers. Elijah, listen to me. I know we've been careful not to make promises about the future, because there are things neither of us can control. But yes, I want you to stay. I want to be your family for as long as you need one. His fingers tightened around hers. What if that's forever? Then it's forever, Sarah said simply. The smile that bloomed across his face was like the sun breaking through clouds, tentative at first, then radiant. For a moment, they simply held on to each other. This makeshift family bound by choice rather than blood. Then Elijah glanced at his watch and the spell broke. We're gonna be late. The frantic rush that followed, teeth brushing, shoe finding, last-minute backpack checking, felt surprisingly normal, as if they'd been doing this dance for years rather than weeks. By the time they pulled up to the school drop-off zone, Elijah's earlier vulnerability had been replaced by nervous excitement. Remember, Sarah said as he prepared to join the stream of children entering the building. I'm picking you up at 3:15, right by the big oak tree. He finished with an eye roll that was gloriously, age-appropriately sassy. I know. Have a great day, Sarah called as he shouldered his new backpack. I'll be thinking about you. He turned back briefly, offering a small wave before disappearing into the crowd of students. Sarah watched until he was completely out of sight, then allowed herself a moment of pure, unadulterated worry. Was he ready for this? Was she sending him into a situation that would overwhelm his still fragile emotional state? Her phone chimed with a text from Marcus. First day drop-off. Successful? Remember to breathe. The message made her laugh, breaking the spiral of anxiety. Typing back a quick affirmative, Sarah started the car and headed to the hospital for her first shift back. Life was moving forward, one careful step at a time. The hospital was busy but familiar. The rhythms of the pediatric ward unchanged in her absence. Sarah moved through her shift with practiced efficiency, checking IVs, administering medications, soothing worried parents. Her colleagues welcomed her back with warm hugs and curious questions about her boy, as they had all started calling Elijah. He started school today, Sarah told her friend Lena during their overlapping lunch break. Full day, regular classroom. That's huge, Lena said, stealing one of Sarah's potato chips. How are you holding up? Honestly, I've checked my phone about 20 times already, even though I know they'll call if there's a problem. Lena smiled knowingly. Welcome to motherhood, honey. That worry never goes away. Not when they're at school. Not when they're on their first date. Not when they're 30 with kids of their own. The casual classification, motherhood, startled Sarah. Was that what this was? This constant low-level hum of concern. This fierce protectiveness. This overwhelming love for a child who had appeared in her life just weeks ago. It's different from nursing, Sarah admitted. With patients, you care deeply. But there's a professional boundary. With Elijah, there's no boundary. When he hurts, I hurt. That's because he's yours now. Lena said simply. Maybe not legally yet, but in all the ways that matter. The truth of it resonated in Sarah's chest. Elijah was hers, not as a possession, but as a responsibility, a privilege, a relationship that transcended paperwork and court dates and biological connections. The realization carried her through the rest of her shift, through the careful handoff of patients to the evening nurse, through the drive to Oak Ridge Elementary where she arrived 15 minutes early, parking where she could see the big oak tree dot at exactly 3:15. The school doors opened and children poured out in a chaotic flood of backpacks and laughter. Sarah scanned the crowd anxiously, standing on tiptoes to see over the heads of other waiting parents. And then there he was, walking beside a tall boy with glasses, listening intently to whatever story was being told. When Elijah spotted her, his face lit up with a smile that erased every doubt, every worry, every moment of uncertainty she had ever felt. Miss Sarah, he called, breaking into a run. Guess what? I got to be line leader, and I knew all the answers in math, and Jason invited me to sit with him at lunch. The words tumbled out in an excited rush as they walked to the car, Elijah's hand naturally finding hers, swinging between them as he chattered about his day. This, Sarah realized, was what happiness felt like, not the quiet contentment of her life before, but this bright, chaotic, terrifying joy of loving a child who was slowly learning to trust the world again. Later that evening, after homework and dinner and the bedtime routine they had established, Sarah sat on the edge of Elijah's bed for their nightly talk. These quiet conversations had become sacred, a space where questions could be asked, feelings examined, worries aired. Today was a good day, Sarah observed, straightening the Star Wars comforter they had picked out together. Elijah nodded, eyes already heavy with sleep. Yeah, school was better than I thought. The kids were nice mostly. I'm glad. Sarah hesitated, then asked, did anyone ask about, your situation? Jason asked if I was new to town. I said yes. Elijah's fingers worried at a loose thread on the blanket, and Mrs. Rodriguez introduced me as Elijah, who lives with Miss Connolly. So I think some kids figured out I don't live with my real mom. Did that bother you? He considered this seriously. Not really. Lots of kids don't live with their real parents. Miguel in my class lives with his grandma, and Zoe has to dad's. That's true, Sarah agreed, relieved by his pragmatic assessment. Miss Sarah, the sudden shift in his tone alerted her to something important coming. Can I ask you something? Anything, sweetheart? Elijah took a deep breath, still focused on the loose thread. If the judge says I can stay with you forever, would you want to be my real mom? Like, adopt me for real? The question suspended time, everything in Sarah's world narrowing to this moment, this child, this impossible gift of a question. Elijah, she said, voice thick with emotion. Nothing in my entire life would make me happier than being your real mom. If that's what you want to, I do, he whispered, finally looking up at her. I really do. Sarah gathered him into her arms, holding him close as his thin arms wrapped around her neck. They stayed that way for a long time, neither wanting to break the moment. Finally, Elijah pulled back, yawning widely. So if the judge says yes, I could call you mom, for real? For real, Sarah confirmed, tucking him in and brushing dark curls from his forehead. Now get some sleep. We've got another big day tomorrow. As she turned out the light, leaving the door cracked the way he preferred, Elijah's drowsy voice followed her. "Good night, Mom." The word, so simple, so profound, brought tears to Sarah's eyes. "Good night, my sweet boy," she whispered. In the living room, Sarah sank onto the couch, overwhelmed by the day's emotional roller coaster. Their court date was still 3 weeks away. The background checks, home studies, and character references were all proceeding well. But nothing was certain yet. Marcus had warned her repeatedly not to make promises they couldn't keep, yet tonight, in the sacred space between mother and child, she had promised anyway, because sometimes faith required stepping out beyond certainty, beyond caution, beyond the carefully constructed boundaries of a life lived safely. Her phone buzzed with a text from Diane. "Just got prelim report from family search. No blood relatives located after extensive search. Sending official documentation tomorrow." One step closer, Sarah typed back her thanks, hope blooming in her chest. Every day without a competing claim from a biological relative increased their chances. Maybe, just maybe, the universe would let them have this. This unexpected family formed in the crucible of loss and hope. Sleep came easily that night. Dreams filled with a future that suddenly seemed possible, school plays and birthdays, holidays and ordinary Tuesdays, all the moments large and small that made up a shared life. Morning arrived with pale sunlight and the familiar sounds of Elijah getting dressed in his room, drawers opening and closing, the soft padding of his feet on the carpet. Sarah stretched and prepared to begin their second official school day, heart lighter than it had been in weeks. The knock that came just as she was pouring Elijah's cereal was unexpected. 3 sharp raps that suggested officialdom rather than friendship. Setting down the cereal box, Sarah glanced at the clock. 7:15 a.m. Far too early for a casual visitor. Through the peephole, she saw 3 dark vehicles parked at the curb. Sleek black limousines that looked wildly out of place on her modest street. On her porch stood a man in an immaculate suit, leather portfolio tucked under one arm. "Can I help you?" Sarah called through the door, sudden dread pulling in her stomach. This Sarah Connolly. The voice was crisp, professional. "My name is James Harrington. I represent Thomas Blackwood. I believe you have temporary custody of his son, Elijah Wilson." The world tilted beneath Sarah's feet. Thomas Blackwood, everyone in the city knew the name. Billionaire real estate developer, philanthropist, notorious recluse, and apparently, if this man was to be believed, Elijah's father. With trembling fingers, Sarah opened the door. Just as Elijah appeared in the hallway behind her, cereal bowl in hand, his small face a perfect picture of confusion. "Mom," he called uncertainly. "Who's at the door?" Sarah stared at the immaculately dressed man on her porch, his words echoing in her head. Thomas Blackwood's son. It was impossible, yet the timing of these limousines, appearing the morning after Diane's text about the family search being complete, suggested otherwise. "There must be some mistake," she said, one arm instinctively moving to block the doorway. "I have temporary custody of Elijah Wilson. His mother was Karen Wilson." James Harrington's expression remained politely neutral. "Yes, Miss Connolly. We're aware of Ms. Wilson's identity and her unfortunate passing. May I come in? This is a rather delicate matter to discuss on your front porch." Behind her, Elijah had frozen in place, cereal bowl clutched in his hands, milk threatening to spill over the edge. "Elijah, honey," Sarah said, not taking her eyes off the man, "why don't you go finish your breakfast in the kitchen? I need to talk to this gentleman for a minute." "But who is he?" Elijah asked, voice small with sudden anxiety. "What does he want?" Sarah turned to him, forcing a reassuring smile. "It's nothing to worry about, just some paperwork to discuss. We don't want to be late for school, right?" The mention of school, their new normal, the routine they'd worked so hard to establish, seemed to steady him. Elijah nodded reluctantly and retreated to the kitchen. Though Sarah noticed, he left the door slightly ajar, turning back to Harrington. She kept her voice low. "I don't know who sent you or what you want, But I'm not discussing anything about Elijah without his caseworker present. Harrington nodded as if he'd expected this response. A perfectly reasonable position, Miss Connolly. I assure you, we have no intention of circumventing proper procedures. He reached into his leather portfolio and extracted an envelope, offering it to her. These documents should help explain the situation. I would also recommend calling Ms. Mercer immediately. Mr. Blackwood's legal team contacted Child Protective Services yesterday evening. With the relevant information, Sarah accepted the envelope with numb fingers, her mind racing. How does Mr. Blackwood even know about Elijah? The family search just concluded, and his name wasn't on the birth certificate. Mr. Blackwood was notified through alternative channels, Harrington said carefully. When Ms. Wilson's identity was confirmed by authorities, certain parties recognized her name in connection with Mr. Blackwood. DNA testing has since confirmed paternity. The clinical language paternity DNA testing made Sarah's stomach clench. This child they were discussing so dispassionately was currently sitting in her kitchen, eating the cereal she had poured for him, in the home where she had promised him a future. If what you're saying is true, Sarah said, fighting to keep her voice steady. Why hasn't Mr. Blackwood come himself? Why send lawyers in limousines? A flicker of something discomfort perhaps crossed Harrington's carefully composed features. Mr. Blackwood is an extremely private individual with numerous security concerns. He is, however, in the second vehicle and would like to meet his son when appropriate. We understand the sensitivity of the situation. Sarah's gaze darted to the middle limousine, its windows tinted beyond transparency. Thomas Blackwood, the reclusive billionaire whose name adorned half the buildings downtown, whose charity foundation funded the children's wing at her hospital, was sitting in a car outside her modest home, apparently waiting to claim a child he had never met. I need to call Diane, Sarah said, clutching the envelope to her chest like a shield. And Marcus, Elijah's caseworker. I'm not making any decisions without them, of course. Harrington agreed smoothly. We anticipated as much. In fact, Ms. Mercer is already en route, as is Mr. Thompson from family court. We'd be happy to wait until they arrive. The casual mention of a family court representative sent ice through Sarah's veins. This wasn't a simple meet and greet. This was a coordinated legal maneuver, executed with the precision and resources only vast wealth could command. Wait out here, she said abruptly, closing the door before Harrington could respond. Leaning against the closed door, Sarah allowed herself 3 deep breaths before reaching for her phone. Diane answered on the first ring. You've had visitors, her friend said without preamble, voice tight with stress. Thomas Blackwood's lawyers are on my porch claiming he's Elijah's father, Sarah replied, keeping her voice low. Tell me this isn't happening, Diane. A heavy sigh came through the phone. I got the call at midnight. DNA results came in yesterday, 98.7% probability of paternity. They've been working on this for days, apparently, ever since they identified Karen Wilson. And you didn't tell me. The betrayal stung, Sarah. I only found out hours ago myself, Diane said defensively. And I texted you about the family search completing because, as far as I knew, it had. Blackwood went around normal channels, private investigators, expedited DNA testing through some lab he probably owns. By the time CPS was formally notified, they already had irrefutable evidence and a team of lawyers demanding immediate action. He can't just swoop in and take Elijah, Sarah insisted, voice cracking. We have a temporary custody arrangement. There are procedures, hearings, which is why I'm already in my car, Diane cut in. Marcus is meeting us there too. Don't agree to anything. Don't sign anything. Just keep Elijah calm until we arrive. He's sitting in a limousine outside my house, Diane. How am I supposed to keep Elijah calm when his long-lost billionaire father is staging what amounts to illegal kidnapping on my front lawn? Sarah, Diane's voice sharpened. Listen to me. This isn't a kidnapping. It's a legal paternity claim, and it changes everything. But it doesn't happen instantly. There will still be hearings, transitions, psychological evaluations. The court always prioritizes the child's well-being, and which is better for Elijah's well-being, Sarah challenged, staying with someone who has been caring for him, helping him heal. Someone he's starting to trust, or being handed over to a stranger who happens to share his DNA, but hasn't shown any interest until now. Silence stretched between them. It's complicated, Diane finally admitted. Biological parents have strong legal standing, especially when there's no evidence of prior unfitness. But judges also consider established bonds and the child's wishes, particularly for a 9-year-old. He called me mom last night, Sarah whispered, the memory suddenly overwhelming in its poignancy. For the first time, Diane's sharp intake of breath was audible though. Sarah, what do I tell him? The question encompassed all the fear, all the heartbreak, all the impossible choices suddenly facing them. The truth, Diane said gently, as much of it as he can understand right now. That someone has come forward who might be his biological father, and that we're all going to talk about what that means, that nothing is changing immediately, that you're still there for him, no matter what. The kitchen door creaked open, and Elijah appeared in the hallway, empty cereal bowl in hand, dark eyes wide with apprehension. I have to go, Sarah told Diane. He's here. I'm 15 minutes away, Diane promised. Hang in there. Ending the call, Sarah knelt down to Elijah's level, forcing a calm she didn't feel into her expression. Hey, buddy, who are those people? Elijah asked, glancing nervously at the front door. Why are there fancy cars outside? Sarah took a deep breath. Elijah, do you remember when we talked about how Diane and Marcus were trying to find out if you had any other family members, people related to you? He nodded slowly, wariness creeping into his posture. Well, it seems they might have found someone who… Sarah struggled to find words that wouldn't terrify him. Someone who might be your biological father. Elijah's face went blank with shock. My dad. But Mom said he was gone before I was born. She said he didn't know about me. That might have been true, Sarah acknowledged, choosing her words carefully. Sometimes adults don't tell each other important things. But now he knows about you, and he's here to meet you. Thomas Blackwood, Elijah said, surprising Sarah with his recall. That man said my dad is Thomas Blackwood. Sarah nodded, watching his face for signs of distress. Yes. Do you know who that is? Elijah's brow furrowed in concentration. There's a Blackwood building downtown, and the hospital has a Blackwood children's wing. Is he rich? Despite everything, Sarah almost laughed at the simplicity of the question. Yes, very rich. He is a businessman who owns many properties in the city, and he's my real dad. The question held a mixture of wonder and suspicion. That's what they're saying, Sarah confirmed. There are tests that can show if someone is related to you biologically by blood. According to those tests, he is your biological father. Elijah was silent for a long moment, processing this information with the intense focus that was so characteristic of him. Finally, he looked up at Sarah, fear naked in his eyes. Do I have to go with him? The question broke Sarah's heart. No, honey, not today. There are a lot of grown-ups who need to talk about what happens next, including Diane and Marcus. No one is going to make you do anything today. But later, his perception cut straight to the heart of the matter. Will I have to go with him later? Sarah wanted desperately to promise him that nothing would change, that he would stay with her forever as they had discussed just last night. But she couldn't lie to him, not about something so important, not when his trust was still so fragile. I don't know yet, she admitted. When a biological parent comes forward, the courts, the people who make these decisions, usually want to consider their relationship very seriously. But they also consider what's best for you. And your feelings matter too. Elijah nodded slowly, taking this in. Then, with a directness that startled her, he asked, Do you want me to stay with you? Yes, Sarah answered without hesitation, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, Elijah. No matter what happens, no matter what anyone decides, I want you to know that I want you to stay. That hasn't changed. Something in his posture relaxed slightly at her words. Then his gaze shifted to the door, shoulders squaring with a determination that seemed old for his 9 years. I want to see him, Elijah declared. My biological father. The unexpected request caught Sarah off guard. Are you sure? We can wait for Diane and Marcus to get here. You don't have to do this right now. I want to know what he looks like, Elijah said simply. If he looks like me. The childlike curiosity behind the request reminded Sarah forcefully of Elijah's age. How, beneath the careful self-containment and precocious understanding, he was still a 9-year-old boy trying to make sense of his place in the world. Okay, she agreed. But we'll do it on our terms. We'll go outside together, and you can stay right beside me the whole time. If you feel uncomfortable or want to go back inside, just squeeze my hand, and we'll come right back in. Deal? Deal? Elijah agreed, reaching for her hand. Together they approached the front door, Elijah's small fingers gripping hers with nervous strength. As Sarah opened the door, she was surprised to find the porch empty. Harrington had retreated to stand beside the lead limousine, speaking quietly into a cell phone at their appearance. He ended his call and approached, stopping a respectful distance away. Miss Connolly, and this must be Elijah. His tone softened noticeably when addressing the boy. It's very nice to meet you, young man. Elijah didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the middle limousine, its dark windows revealing nothing of the occupant. Within, Elijah would like to meet Mr. Blackwood, Sarah stated, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. On his terms, and only briefly. We have school and work commitments this morning. Harrington looked momentarily disconcerted, as if the direct approach had disrupted some carefully choreographed plan. Of course. Let me just inform Mr. Blackwood. Before he could complete the sentence, the door of the middle limousine opened, and a tall figure emerged without assistance. Thomas Blackwood was not what Sarah had expected. The few photographs she had seen in news articles showed a stern-faced businessman in his 50s, always photographed from a distance at formal events. The man who stood by the limousine was indeed in his early 50s, but there was nothing remote or intimidating about his presence. Dressed in a simple charcoal suit with no tie, he had Elijah's dark curls, now salted with gray, and the same intense eyes. His face bore lines of strain around the mouth and eyes, and he stood with the slight awkwardness of someone unused to being observed. For a long moment, no one spoke. Thomas Blackwood stared at Elijah with naked wonder, while Elijah studied the man with equal intensity, clearly noting the similarities between them. It was Blackwood who finally broke the silence, his voice surprisingly gentle. Hello, Elijah. I'm Thomas. No titles, no presumptions of relationship, just a simple introduction. Elijah's grip on Sarah's hand tightened, but he didn't signal to retreat. You're my biological father, he stated, testing the words as if they're reality. Blackwood nodded, his expression a complex mixture of emotions. Yes, I am. Though I only learned about you very recently. If I had known earlier, he trailed off, perhaps realizing there was no good way to complete that sentence, no explanation that could erase 9 years of absence. Did you know my mom? Elijah asked, the question direct and unsparing. A shadow crossed Blackwood's face. Yes, a long time ago. She worked at one of my hotels. We were friends, briefly. Then she left suddenly, and I never heard from her again. I didn't know she was expecting you. The simplified explanation, clearly edited for a child's ears, nevertheless rang with genuine regret. She died, Elijah stated flatly. I know. I'm very sorry. Blackwood's response seemed authentic, his discomfort not with Elijah, but with the situation's inherent awkwardness. I understand you've been through a lot recently. Miss Sarah is taking care of me now, Elijah said, moving almost imperceptibly closer to her side. She's going to be my mom. For real. The declaration, so innocent and so devastating in its timing, hung in the air between them. Sarah felt her throat constrict with emotion, even as her mind registered the legal complications this conversation was creating. Blackwood's gaze shifted to Sarah for the first time, assessing her with the same intensity Elijah often displayed. Whatever he saw seemed to affect him. Something in his expression softened further. Miss Connolly has been very kind to care for you, he acknowledged, addressing Elijah directly rather than talking over his head. I'm grateful to her for that. Before the conversation could continue, a car pulled up behind the Limousines' Diane's practical sedan. With Marcus's vehicle right behind it, the cavalry had arrived, and not a moment too soon. Perhaps we should continue this discussion inside, Harrington suggested smoothly, watching the new arrivals with barely concealed irritation. Now that everyone is here, we can address the situation properly. Sarah looked down at Elijah, whose face had closed off into the careful neutrality she recognized from their first meeting as protective mask against uncertainty. What do you think, buddy? Are you okay with everyone coming inside to talk? He considered this briefly, then nodded. Yes, but I still want to go to school after. The simple request clinging to normalcy amid chaos pierced Sarah's heart. Of course, school is still happening, no matter what, as Diane and Marcus approached, faces tight with professional concern. Sarah suddenly realized how surreal the scene must appear from the outside. 3 black limousines parked before her modest bungalow, a billionaire standing awkwardly on her patchy lawn, social workers rushing to intervene. Mrs. Mercer, Harrington greeted Diane with practiced cordiality. And Mr. Chen, I presume? Thank you both for joining us so promptly. We were already on our way when your firm contacted us. Mr. Harrington, Diane replied, her tone making it clear she wasn't pleased with how events had unfolded. Miss Connolly and Elijah are under our department's supervision. Of course. Harrington agreed smoothly. Mr. Blackwood fully respects the proper protocols. We're simply eager to begin the process of reuniting father and son. The phrase sent a chill through Sarah. Reuniting suggested a relationship that had never existed, a bond that had been broken rather than one that had never formed. Let's take this inside, Marcus suggested, his calm professionalism a welcome counterpoint to the tension. Elijah, how are you doing with all this? The simple question, directed specifically to the child at the center of the drama, refocused everyone's attention where it belonged. Elijah, still holding tightly to Sarah's hand, shrugged with forced casualness. It's weird, he admitted, but I'm okay. Good man, Marcus said warmly. Remember what we talked about in our sessions. You get to have feelings about big changes, and all those feelings are okay. Elijah nodded, some of the tension leaving his small frame at Marcus's familiar presence. I know, and I can take a break if it gets too much. Exactly right. Marcus agreed. Shall we go inside now? The procession into Sarah's living room was awkward. Too many people for the modest space. Too much power imbalance for comfortable conversation. Blackwood declined to sit, standing instead by the window with a curiously hesitant air. His lawyers arranged themselves strategically, while Diane and Marcus positioned themselves near Sarah and Elijah on the couch. From the third limousine, the final visitors had emerged a silver-haired woman with Blackwood's eyes and bearing, and an elderly man carrying a medical bag, both of whom were introduced simply as family representatives. Perhaps we should allow Elijah to prepare for school. While the adults discussed preliminary arrangements, Harrington suggested, glancing at his watch, we wouldn't want to disrupt his education. I want to stay, Elijah said firmly. Surprising. Everyone, you're talking about me. I should get to listen. Sarah exchanged glances with Marcus, who gave a subtle nod of approval. Elijah is right, she said, as long as he's comfortable. He should be included in age-appropriate discussions about his future. Very well, Harrington conceded, though he looked displeased. The situation, while unusual, is legally straightforward. Mr. Blackwood has established paternity and wishes to assume custody of his biological son. We've prepared the necessary paperwork to begin the process. With all due respect, Marcus interjected, the situation is far from straightforward. Elijah has been through significant trauma, including the loss of his mother and adjustment to a new home. Any transition needs to prioritize his psychological well-being, not legal expediency. No one is suggesting immediate removal. The silver-haired woman introduced as Vivian Blackwood. Thomas's sister spoke for the first time. Her voice was cultured, but warmer than Harrington's. We understand the delicacy of the situation. What exactly are you suggesting? Then Sarah asked, fighting to keep accusation from her tone. Harrington stepped forward. We propose a gradual transition period. Supervised visits with Mr. Blackwood, increasing in duration and frequency over several weeks. Concurrent therapeutic support for Elijah to process these changes. Then, when all parties agree he's ready, permanent relocation to Mr. Blackwood's primary residence. The clinical outline of Elijah's future so neatly arranged without any input from those who had been caring for him made Sarah's anger flare. Before she could object, however, Elijah himself spoke up. Do I have to leave Miss Sarah? The direct question, asked with a child's devastating simplicity, silenced the room. All eyes turned to Thomas Blackwood, who seemed genuinely taken aback by being addressed directly. He stepped away from the window, moving to kneel at eye level with Elijah, a gesture that surprised Sarah with its humility. Elijah, he said carefully, I know this is all very sudden and confusing. I've only just learned that I have a son, that you exist. It's a lot for me to take into. The admission of vulnerability seemed genuine. I would very much like the chance to know you, to be your father. But I don't want to cause you more hurt or disruption than you've already experienced. But I have to live with you, Elijah persisted. Honing in on the core issue with characteristic directness, Blackwood hesitated, clearly torn between legal reality and the fear visible in his son's eyes. It was Vivian who answered, her tone gentle but frank. Eventually, yes. That would be the normal outcome when a parent is able and willing to care for their child. But not right away. And not until you've had time to get to know each other. Sarah felt Elijah's hand tighten around hers, his body tensing with distress. Marcus noticed too, leaning forward slightly. Elijah, remember our breathing exercise, he suggested quietly. 5 counts in, hold for 3. 5 counts out. The boy nodded, closing his eyes briefly to follow the familiar calming technique. When he opened them again, his gaze fixed on Thomas Blackwood with surprising intensity. Do you have other kids? He asked. The question seemed to catch Blackwood off guard. No other children. Have you ever been a dad before? No, I haven't. Elijah considered this information with a furrowed brow. So you don't know how to be one. The observation, devastating in its accuracy, hung in the air. A flush crept up Blackwood's neck, but to his credit, he didn't deny the truth. You're right, he acknowledged. I don't have experience as a father. I would have a lot to learn. Miss Sarah knows how to take care of me, Elijah continued, his voice gaining strength. She knows what to do when I have nightmares. She knows I like pancakes for breakfast and that I need the night light on. And the door opened a little bit. She knows how to help me with school stuff. Each simple, concrete example of care landed like a blow. Sarah watched Thomas Blackwood's face as he absorbed the reality of what parenting actually entailed, not abstract legal rights, but 1,000 daily acts of attention and love. Those are important things to know, Blackwood agreed quietly. Things I would need to learn. Mr. Blackwood, Marcus interjected gently. Perhaps this is a good moment to consider the approach here. Elijah has formed a significant attachment to Miss Connolly during a time of extreme vulnerability. Disrupting that attachment, even gradually, could cause additional trauma. The elderly man, who had remained silent until now, introduced as Dr. Morris. The Blackwood family physician stepped forward. "May I suggest a brief consultation with Elijah, purely to assess his current emotional state and well-being? It might help inform our approach." Marcus looked to Sarah, who nodded cautiously. "Elijah, would you be comfortable talking to Dr. Morris? For a few minutes. I'll be right here the whole time." Elijah studied the elderly doctor, whose kind face and gentle demeanor seemed to pass some internal test. "Okay." As Dr. Morris engaged Elijah in quiet conversation at the far end of the room, the adults fell into tense silence. Sarah watched Thomas Blackwood, who couldn't seem to take his eyes off his newly discovered son. There was genuine wonder in his gaze, but also uncertainty, the look of a man facing a responsibility he had never anticipated. "Miss Connolly," Vivian Blackwood said quietly, moving to sit beside Sarah. "I know this situation is incredibly difficult for you. You've opened your home and heart to Elijah, only to have us appear with legal claims that threaten that relationship." The frank acknowledgement was unexpected. "Yes," Sarah agreed simply. "It is difficult. I want you to know that we're not insensitive to what you've done for him." Thomas was shocked when he learned about Elijah. Angry at first that Karen Wilson had kept this from him, that he'd lost 9 years he can never get back. Vivian's voice held a wistful note. "Our family has always been complicated. Thomas was raised with wealth but not much warmth. He's never prioritized personal relationships with respect." "Miss Blackwood," Sarah replied, keeping her voice low, "that doesn't sound like an ideal environment for a traumatized child." Rather than taking offense, Vivian nodded thoughtfully. "You might be right, which is why I was hoping we might consider alternative arrangements." Before she could elaborate, Dr. Morris returned to the main group, gesturing for Thomas to join him for a private conversation. The two men spoke in hushed tones, Blackwood's expression shifting from surprise to thoughtfulness as the doctor spoke. When they rejoined the group, Thomas Blackwood seemed to have come to some decision. He addressed the room with new authority, silencing his lawyers who had been quietly strategizing in the corner. "I'd like to propose a compromise," he announced, "one that prioritizes Elijah's well-being while respecting all parties' concerns." Sarah straightened, hope and trepidation warring in her chest. "Elijah remains here with Miss Connolly for now," Blackwood continued, surprising everyone. "I will begin visitation supervised at first, then perhaps more independent as trust is established. We reconsider permanent arrangements only when Elijah himself feels comfortable with the idea of transition." Harrington looked alarmed. "Mr. Blackwood, while I appreciate the sentiment, legally speaking, I am still his father regardless of where he lives temporarily," Blackwood cut in firmly, "and I can pursue my parental rights while also ensuring his emotional well-being." He turned to Sarah directly. "Miss Connolly, would you be amenable to this arrangement, to allowing me to get to know my son while he remains in your care?" The unexpected proposal left Sarah momentarily speechless. It was miles better than what she had feared: immediate removal. Court battles, Elijah torn from the stability he had only just begun to find. Yet it was still a fundamental shift in their reality. The introduction of a permanent third party into their emerging family unit. "I would need assurances," she said carefully, "that Elijah's routine wouldn't be disrupted, that his therapy continues, that any changes happen at a pace he can handle." "Agreed," Blackwood said promptly. "I would defer to you and Mr. Chen on those matters." "And financial support," Harrington interjected, ever practical. Mr. Blackwood would, of course, provide for all of Elijah's needs: education, healthcare, extracurricular activities. Sarah bristled at the implication that she couldn't provide adequately for Elijah, but she checked her pride. If this arrangement gave them time for Elijah to heal, time for her to secure more permanent legal standing, time for everyone to find the best path forward, then practical details like money were secondary. That would be acceptable, she agreed. As long as it's clear, that I maintain decision-making authority for daily matters. Joint authority, Harrington countered. With a mediation process for any disagreements, agreed, Sarah said, surprising herself with her willingness to compromise. But looking at Elijah watching quietly from across the room, his future hanging in the balance of this adult negotiation, she knew that ego and control were luxuries she couldn't afford. What mattered was keeping him safe, keeping him here, giving him time to adjust to these seismic changes. Dr. Morris spoke up, addressing Thomas directly. It might be wise to arrange a neutral territory for initial visits, somewhere Elijah enjoys. But that isn't loaded with emotional significance for anyone. The Science Center, Elijah suggested unexpectedly, his voice small but clear. I like space stuff. The simple request, normal, age-appropriate, touchingly mundane amid the high stakes. Legal discussion brought a smile to Thomas Blackwood's face. It was the first genuine smile Sarah had seen from him, transforming his serious features and highlighting the resemblance to his son. The Science Center sounds perfect, he agreed. I'm quite interested in astronomy myself. This small shared interest seemed to ease something in Elijah's posture, a tiny bridge across the vast unknown between him and this stranger who was his father. Diane, who had been observing the proceedings with professional neutrality, finally spoke. If I may, I'd like to suggest formalizing this arrangement through the family court. A temporary joint custody agreement with primary physical custody remaining with Miss Connolly, and a structured visitation schedule for Mr. Blackwood. This would protect everyone's interests while we work toward a more permanent solution. That seems sensible, Thomas agreed. Is there any reason this couldn't be arranged today? I'd like to begin building a relationship with my son as soon as possible. The urgency in his voice was understandable, yet it sent a ripple of unease through Sarah, 9 years absent, and now every day mattered. But she kept this thought to herself, recognizing that from his perspective, enough time had already been lost. As the details were hammered out, visitation schedules, financial arrangements, legal procedures, Sarah found herself watching Thomas Blackwood with new eyes. There was genuine emotion in the way he looked at Elijah. A hunger to know his son that couldn't be faked, whatever his flaws, whatever his reasons for this sudden appearance in their lives. His desire to be a father seemed sincere. It was nearly 9 o'clock when the impromptu conference finally concluded. Elijah's school day already half missed. The boy had retreated into watchful silence, overwhelmed by the adults talking around and about him. I think we've accomplished enough for one morning, Marcus said firmly, ever mindful of Elijah's well-being. The paperwork can be processed without Elijah present. Perhaps he and Miss Connolly would like to salvage the remainder of their day. Relief washed over Elijah's face at this suggestion. Can we still go to school? He asked Sarah hopefully. Jason said we're doing a volcano experiment in science today. Of course we can, Sarah assured him, grateful for the chance to reestablish some normalcy. Why don't you go get your backpack ready while I finish up here? As Elijah disappeared down the hallway, Thomas Blackwood approached Sarah directly, his lawyers momentarily distracted by paperwork. Miss Connolly, he began, voice lowered for privacy. I want to thank you for what you've done for my son, for caring for him when I couldn't. The gratitude seemed genuine, but Sarah wasn't ready to absolve him so easily. I didn't do it for you. I did it for him. I understand that, he acknowledged, and I'm not trying to disrupt the security you've given him. But I hope you can understand my position too. Finding out suddenly that I have a child that I've missed 9 years I can never get back, it's overwhelming. Despite herself, Sarah felt a flicker of empathy. The situation wasn't of his making either. I do understand. But Elijah has to be the priority here, his feelings, his needs, his healing. Not your need to make up for lost time. Not my attachment to him. Not anyone's legal rights. Just him. Blackwood studied her face intently, as if truly seeing her for the first time. You love him already, he observed quietly. Yes, Sarah admitted. seeing no point in denying what was surely obvious to everyone. I do. That's good, he said, sounding genuinely relieved. Whatever happens, Elijah needs people who love him unconditionally. His mother, whatever her failings, clearly did. And now you do. That matters more than wealth or legal claims. Or blood ties. The insight surprised Sarah. Perhaps Thomas Blackwood was more self-aware than his corporate reputation suggested. Does this arrangement, he hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. Will this work for you? I know it's not what you anticipated when you took Elijah in. Sarah considered her answer carefully. It's better than losing him entirely, she acknowledged, and it gives him time to adjust, which is what matters most. Beyond that, we'll have to see. Blackwood nodded, accepting the tentative nature of her response. I meant what I said about learning. I don't know how to be a father, but I want to try. For him. Before Sarah could respond, Elijah returned with his backpack, eyeing the adults warily. Are we going now? Yes, we are, Sarah confirmed, relieved. To escape the tension of the morning, Mr. Blackwood was just leaving too. Something vulnerable flashed across Thomas Blackwood's face as he looked at his son, hope and fear. And 9 years of absence all mingled together. Elijah, would it be all right if I visited you tomorrow? Perhaps we could go to the science center as you suggested. Elijah's gaze darted to Sarah, seeking reassurance when she nodded encouragingly. He turned back to Blackwood with cautious acceptance. Okay, but Miss Sarah comes too, of course. Blackwood agreed immediately. I wouldn't have it any other way. As the procession of legal representatives and Blackwood family members filed out of Sarah's modest home, the contrast between their world and hers had never been more apparent. 3 gleaming limousines on her patchy lawn, men in tailored suits, with leather portfolios. The casual mention of private medical labs and expedited legal proceedings, it was a power that could overwhelm anyone. Yet as Sarah watched Thomas Blackwood's retreating back, she felt an unexpected flicker of compassion. Wealth and influence hadn't prepared him for this, for discovering a child he never knew existed, for navigating the complex emotional terrain of fatherhood without any preparation, and that, perhaps, they were not so different, both thrust into roles they hadn't anticipated, both trying to do right by a boy caught between worlds. Miss Sarah, Elijah's voice pulled her back to the present. Are we really going to school still? Glancing at her watch, Sarah realized they'd missed most of the morning already. You know what? Let's have a mental health day instead. How does that sound? Elijah's face brightened momentarily, then clouded with uncertainty. But what about the volcano experiment? I'll call your teacher and explain what happened. Maybe they can save one for you to do tomorrow. Sarah knelt down to his level, meeting those serious dark eyes directly. It's been a pretty overwhelming morning. I think we both deserve some time to process everything. He nodded slowly, accepting her judgment. Can we get ice cream? The simple, childlike request made Sarah laugh with unexpected relief. After a morning of legal negotiations and life-altering revelations, ice cream seemed gloriously ordinary. Ice cream for breakfast. That's pretty wild, she teased, glad to see a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. But I think today qualifies as a special occasion. As they drove to the local ice cream parlor that miraculously opened at 10 a.m., Sarah kept glancing at Elijah in the rearview mirror. He seemed pensive but not withdrawn, processing. Rather than retreating, double quotes, penny for your thoughts, she asked, as they settled into a booth with their respective treats. Chocolate fudge brownie for her. Mint chocolate chip for him. Elijah poked at his ice cream thoughtfully. He looks like me, he said finally. Mr. Blackwood, we have the same hair and eyes. You do. Sarah agreed. I noticed it right away. Do you think he's really my dad? Like, for real? Sarah chose her words carefully. The DNA test is very accurate. Biologically speaking, yes, he's your father. But being a parent is about more than biology, Elijah. It's about being there, day in and day out, about knowing someone and caring for them, like you do," Elijah observed, looking up from his ice cream. "Yes," Sarah acknowledged, heart swelling. "Like I try to do. Can you have the parents who aren't married to each other? Like one mom and one dad, but they live in different houses." The question revealed how hard Elijah was working to conceptualize his new reality. Absolutely. Lots of kids have parents who live separately. It's called co-parenting. Elijah seemed to turn this over in his mind, testing the concept for stability. "So I could still live with you, but visit him sometimes." "That's what we agreed to try. At least for now," Sarah confirmed, careful not to make promises she couldn't keep. "How do you feel about that?" He shrugged, the gesture both childlike and painfully adult. "It's weird. I never had a dad before. Mom always said he didn't even know about me." "And that was probably true," Sarah said gently. "From what Mr. Blackwood said, your mom never told him she was pregnant with you. Why not?" The question cut to the heart of mysteries Sarah couldn't solve. "I don't know, sweetheart. Sometimes adults make complicated decisions for reasons that even they might not fully understand." Elijah absorbed this, then asked with characteristic directness, "Is he going to take me away from you?" Sarah's heart contracted painfully. "Not right now. We all agreed that wouldn't be good for you. But eventually there might be changes. I can't promise what the future will look like, Elijah. I wish I could." "I don't want to leave you," he said quietly, eyes fixed on his melting ice cream. Even if he is rich and has fancy cars, the simple declaration brought tears to Sarah's eyes. "I don't want you to leave either. And no matter what happens, no matter where you live or who you live with, I will always be here for you." "That's a promise I can make." Elijah nodded, seemingly satisfied with this assurance. "Can we go to the park after this? I don't want to think about grown-up stuff anymore today." Sarah smiled, grateful for his resilience. "The park sounds perfect." The rest of the day unfolded with deliberate normalcy. The park, a stop at the library for new books, simple sandwiches for lunch, an afternoon movie with popcorn. By unspoken agreement, neither mentioned Thomas Blackwood or the morning's events again. It wasn't until that evening, after Elijah had gone to bed, that Sarah allowed herself to fully confront the reality of their situation. Sitting alone in her living room, cup of tea cooling beside her, she called Diane. "How are you holding up?" her friend asked without preamble. "I'm oscillating between terror, anger, and a bizarre sense of relief that it wasn't worse," Sarah admitted. "What about the paperwork? Is the temporary agreement official?" "The judge signed off on it this afternoon," Diane confirmed. "Primary physical custody remains with you, with Thomas Blackwood granted supervised visitation, transitioning to more independent time. As things progress, child support and educational funds have already been established. Blackwood's lawyers don't waste time. And long term," Sarah pressed, "what are the chances that we could maintain this arrangement indefinitely?" Diane's hesitation spoke volumes. "It's complicated, Sarah. Blackwood has significant advantages: biological connection, limitless resources, a clean background. In most cases, courts favor biological parents unless there's evidence of unfitness. But Elijah has been through trauma. Surely uprooting him again would be considered harmful. It's a factor the court will consider, yes. But courts also tend to believe children benefit from relationships with biological parents when possible. The fact that Blackwood is proposing gradual transition rather than immediate removal works in his favor. It shows he's prioritizing Elijah's well-being." Sarah closed her eyes, fighting back tears of frustration. "So what do I do? Just wait for him to take Elijah when he decides the transition period is over?" "No," Diane said firmly. "You use this time. Build your case for why continued shared custody is in Elijah's best interest. Document everything: his progress with you, his adjustment to school, his therapeutic journey, and," she hesitated before adding, "get to know Blackwood, understand his motivations, his parenting philosophy. Find common ground if you can. You want me to befriend the billionaire who's trying to take my child. I want you to recognize that Elijah's life now includes both of you. Diane corrected gently. The more adversarial this becomes, the more he'll suffer. He needs adults who can collaborate for his benefit, not fight over him like property. The advice was sound, if bitter to swallow. Sarah knew from her years in pediatric nursing that children caught between warring adults inevitably suffered, regardless of which side won. I'll try, she promised reluctantly, for Elijah's sake. That's all anyone can ask, Diane said, and Sarah, for what it's worth. I was impressed by Blackwood today. He could have steamrolled over everyone with his resources, but he chose to listen instead. That suggests he might genuinely care about what's best for Elijah. After hanging up, Sarah remained on the couch, mind racing with contingency plans. Imagine scenarios, desperate strategies. The future that had seemed so clear just yesterday: adoption, permanence. A family of two now shimmered with uncertainty. A soft noise from the hallway drew her attention. Elijah stood in the doorway, in his Star Wars pajamas, hair tousled from restless sleep. Hey, Sarah said softly. Can't sleep. He shook his head, patting over to curl up beside her on the couch. I had a dream about my mom. Do you want to tell me about it? Elijah leaned against her side, seeking comfort. She was leaving me at the hospital again, but this time she told me why. She said she was sick and knew she was going to die, so she took me somewhere safe first. The dream's attempt to make sense of abandonment, to assign noble motives to a painful act, broke Sarah's heart. That sounds like a hard dream. Do you think that's really why she did it? Elijah asked, voice small in the quiet living room. Because she knew she was sick. Sarah stroked his tangled curls, choosing honesty over comfortable lies. I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe she did know she was very sick. Or maybe she thought you'd have a better chance with someone else. What I do know is that she made sure you were somewhere safe before she left. That suggests she cared about what happened to you. It was the most generous interpretation possible of Karen Wilson's final act and act that, from a clinical perspective, could be viewed as calculated abandonment. But Elijah needed to believe his mother had loved him, had thought of his welfare even in her darkest moments. The belief was essential to his healing. Tomorrow we're going to the Science Center with Mr. Blackwood, Elijah said after a thoughtful silence. Will that be weird? Sarah couldn't help but smile at his directness. Probably a little weird, yes. New situations often are, but we'll be together. And we can leave if you start feeling uncomfortable. What if I like him? The question held a note of anxious betrayal, as if enjoying his father's company would somehow dishonor his mother's memory, or his bond with Sarah. Then that would be a good thing, Sarah assured him. It's okay to like people who are kind to you, Elijah. It doesn't mean you're being disloyal to anyone else. He nodded, apparently satisfied with this permission. I'm kind of excited about the planetarium show. Jason said they have real astronaut food in the gift shop. Well, we'll definitely have to check that out then, Sarah promised, heart lightening at his cautious enthusiasm. Now, how about we get you back to bed? We've got a big day tomorrow. As she tucked him in for the second time that night, Sarah was struck by the resilience of children, their capacity to absorb seismic changes and still wonder about astronaut food, to face uncertainty and still find excitement in a planetarium show. Elijah's world had been upended repeatedly in his short life, yet here he was, eyes drooping towards sleep, still capable of anticipation and hope. Whatever came next, whatever complex negotiations and emotional adjustments awaited them, Sarah vowed to protect the resilience with everything she had. The Science Center, with its soaring glass atrium and interactive exhibits, was crowded with weekend visitors when Sarah and Elijah arrived the following morning. Thomas Blackwood was already waiting by the entrance, having apparently dismissed his entourage of lawyers and assistants for the day. Dressed in casual slacks and a button-down shirt, rather than yesterday's formal suit, He looked almost ordinary, just another father waiting for a family outing. Almost, but not quite. The subtle deference of the staff, the security personnel trying to look inconspicuous nearby, the velvet robe discreetly blocking other visitors. From the exhibit entrance, these small details betrayed Blackwood's status as someone accustomed to special treatment. "Good morning," he greeted them, a tentative smile softening his features. "I hope I haven't overstepped, but I arranged for a private viewing of the new space exhibition before it opens to the general public. I thought it might be more comfortable for all of us." Sarah bit back her initial reaction that such arrangements highlighted the vast disparity in their circumstances. That ordinary people didn't get private viewings and velvet ropes. This wasn't about her discomfort with wealth or privilege. It was about Elijah having a positive experience that was thoughtful, she acknowledged. "What do you think, Elijah?" "Private tour sound good." Elijah, who had been half hidden behind Sarah, peered up at Blackwood with cautious interest. "Will we still see the planetarium show?" "Absolutely," Blackwood confirmed. "I've scheduled that for 11:30 after we explore the exhibits. I heard it's about black holes today. I read a book about those from the library." Elijah offered unexpectedly. "They're so dense that not even light can escape their gravity." Blackwood's face lit up with genuine pleasure at this shared interest. "That's exactly right. Have you read about neutron stars too? Almost as dense as black holes, but still visible." As they entered the exhibition space, guided by an enthusiastic curator clearly honored to be showing the collection to Thomas Blackwood. Personally, Sarah hung back slightly, watching the interaction between father and son. There was an awkwardness there, certainly, but also undeniable points of connection. Both possessed the same intensity of focus, the same analytical approach to new information. Both asked thoughtful questions that delved beyond surface explanations. Watching them bent over a display about exoplanets, dark heads inclined at identical angles, Sarah felt a complicated twist of emotions: pride in Elijah's brightness, sadness at the emerging bond that might eventually separate him from her, reluctant admiration for Blackwood's genuine engagement with his son's interests. "He's quite remarkable," a voice observed quietly beside her. Sarah turned to find Vivian Blackwood had appeared at her elbow, elegantly understated in casual clothes. "That probably cost more than Sarah's monthly mortgage payment." "Yes, he is," Sarah agreed, watching as Elijah explained something to his father, small hands gesturing enthusiastically. "He absorbs information like a sponge, especially about science and history." Thomas was the same at that age, Vivian noted, endlessly curious, always taking things apart to see how they work. It drove our mother to distraction. The casual glimpse into Blackwood's childhood humanized him in a way Sarah hadn't expected. "Were you close growing up?" she asked, curious about the family Elijah might eventually join. A shadow passed over Vivian's elegant features. "Our childhood was complicated. Our father was not a kind man, and our mother was often absent in all the ways that mattered. Thomas practically raised me after our father died when he was 16. The information recalibrated Sarah's understanding of Thomas Blackwood. Not just a privileged heir, but a young man thrust into responsibility, caring for a younger sister while still a child himself. Perhaps his hesitancy around Elijah wasn't just inexperience, but the weight of his own complicated relationship with fatherhood. "Is that why he never had a family of his own?" Sarah asked, then winced at her own directness. "I'm sorry, that's personal." "It's a fair question, given the circumstances," Vivian said, watching her brother with a mixture of fondness and concern. "Thomas focused on building his company from nothing. After college, his way of ensuring we'd never be vulnerable again. I think, by the time he achieved financial security, his work habits were set. Relationships became secondary, then almost non-existent, until now," Sarah observed, watching as Blackwood listened intently to Elijah's explanation of how telescopes worked. "Until now," Vivian agreed, Miss Connolly, Sarah. If I may, I want you to know that I appreciate what you've done for my nephew, the stability you've provided, the care you've shown. Whatever arrangements are ultimately made, you will always be an important part of Elijah's life. I'll make sure of that. The promise, delivered with quiet authority, suggested Vivian Blackwood held considerable influence over her brother's decisions. Before Sarah could respond, Elijah bounded over, excitement temporarily overcoming his usual reserve. Miss Sarah, they have a real piece of a meteorite you can touch. It's from outer space. He grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the display. Come see. As the morning progressed, Sarah watched the careful dance between Thomas and Elijah, moments of connection followed by retreat. Tentative jokes met with cautious smiles. Shared interests providing bridges across the chasm of 9 years' absence. For his part, Blackwood seemed determined to follow Elijah's lead, neither pushing for instant closeness nor retreating into formal distance. During the planetarium show, sitting in the darkened theater with stars swirling overhead, Sarah found herself observing Thomas Blackwood rather than the celestial display. The wonder on his face as he glanced between the cosmic spectacle and his son's rapt expression revealed something vulnerable. Beneath the polished exterior, a man discovering an unexpected joy, a connection transcending wealth and status and legal claims. The moment felt private, almost sacred. Sarah looked away. After the show came lunch, not in the crowded cafeteria, but in a small private dining room Sarah hadn't known existed. The setting was elegant but not ostentatious, with a child-friendly menu that included Elijah's favorite chicken nuggets, alongside more sophisticated options. I hope this is acceptable, Blackwood said to Sarah as they settled at the table. I thought a quieter setting might allow for easier conversation. It's fine, Sarah assured him, setting aside her discomfort with special treatment. Though, you should know that Elijah is perfectly content with normal cafeteria food too. Duly noted, Blackwood replied with unexpected humor. I'm still learning the appropriate parameters in my usual sphere. Private dining rooms are standard. And what is your usual sphere, exactly? Sarah asked, realizing she knew little about his daily life beyond newspaper headlines about business acquisitions and charitable donations. Blackwood considered this as he helped Elijah unfold his napkin. Property development primarily, though the company has diversified considerably over the years. Hospitality, technology investments, pharmaceutical research. My role now is largely strategic oversight rather than day-to-day operations. He means he tells other people what to build and buy. Vivian translated with a fond eye roll. And spends too much time in meetings. That sounds boring, Elijah observed candidly, dunking a chicken nugget in ketchup. To Sarah's surprise, Blackwood laughed a genuine, unguarded sound. It often is, actually, though less boring than quarterly tax filings, which I had to do myself when the company was smaller. What did you want to be when you were my age? Elijah asked, the question catching everyone at the table off guard. With its perceptiveness, Blackwood's expression shifted, becoming more thoughtful. An astronaut, actually. I was obsessed with the space program. Had models of all the rockets hanging from my ceiling. Really. Elijah's interest was piqued. What happened? Life, I suppose. Blackwood replied with a hint of wistfulness. My father died when I was in high school, and I had responsibilities to my family. College became about practical degrees rather than dreams. Then building the business became all-consuming. But you're rich now, Elijah pointed out with a child's blunt logic. Can't you still be an astronaut if you want? The question seemed to genuinely startle Blackwood. I never really considered that the dream might still be an option. I'm probably too old now for NASA's program. You could buy a ticket on one of those space tourism rockets, Elijah suggested, clearly warming to the idea. I saw a show about them. Regular people can go to space if they have enough money. Perhaps we could look into that together, Blackwood suggested, a tentative invitation for future connection. Research which companies are most promising. Elijah nodded, clearly intrigued by the idea. I can help. I'm good at research. He is, Sarah confirmed. Touched by Elijah's gradual warming toward his father, he spent 3 hours at the library last week comparing different telescope models before deciding which one to put on his wish list. You're interested in astronomy too? Blackwood asked, genuine pleasure lighting his features. Yeah, I like looking at stars. Miss Sarah said maybe for Christmas. He trailed off, suddenly aware of the implications of mentioning future plans. With Sarah in front of the man who might change those plans, an awkward silence fell over the table. It was Vivian who broke it, smoothly changing the subject to ask Elijah about his favorite exhibits from the morning. As conversation resumed, Sarah caught Thomas Blackwood watching her, his expression unreadable. After lunch came the gift shop, a potential minefield of different parenting philosophies. Sarah had already decided to let Elijah choose one item within her budget, their usual agreement for special outings. Blackwood, however, seemed prepared to purchase anything that caught his son's interest. He can have whatever he likes, he murmured to Sarah as they watched Elijah examining a display of space-themed t-shirts. That's not how we usually do things, Sarah replied quietly. Elijah and I have an understanding about reasonable limits. Blackwood looked momentarily taken aback, then thoughtful. Of course, I don't want to undermine your established boundaries. What would be appropriate? The sincere question, the willingness to defer to her judgment rather than impose his own, surprised Sarah. One item of his choosing, within a reasonable price range, for special occasions like this, maybe $40 or so. Nodding his understanding, Blackwood approached Elijah. Find anything interesting? I thought we might each choose one souvenir to remember today by. The careful phrasing framing the purchase as mutual rather than one-sided giving showed an unexpected sensitivity. Elijah eventually selected a build-your-own planetarium kit, while Blackwood chose a coffee mug with constellations that appeared when filled with hot liquid. Look, Miss Sarah, Elijah said, showing her his selection. It projects stars on the ceiling. Can we put it together when we get home? Of course, she promised. Maybe we can use it for your bedtime story tonight. As the outing wound to a close, Sarah was surprised to realize nearly 5 hours had passed. Elijah, though clearly tired from the emotional energy of navigating this new relationship, seemed genuinely content with how the day had unfolded. He'd maintained appropriate boundaries, no spontaneous hugs or excessive familiarity, but had gradually relaxed enough to share his interests and ask questions. In the Science Center's main lobby, the moment of parting arrived with its inevitable awkwardness. How did one conclude such a visit with formal handshakes, vague promises of future meetings? I've had a wonderful time today, Thomas said, addressing Elijah directly. Thank you for sharing your knowledge about space with me. I learned a lot, Elijah nodded, suddenly shy again. It was pretty fun, especially the black hole simulator. I wondered if. Blackwood glanced at Sarah, seeking permission. Perhaps we could do something similar next weekend. The Natural History Museum has a new dinosaur exhibit I thought might be interesting. Dinosaurs. Elijah's excitement briefly overcame his reserve. With real fossils? Very real. Blackwood confirmed. Some newly discovered species from Argentina, I believe. Sarah felt Elijah's questioning gaze. The decision was technically hers to make under their current arrangement, but she appreciated Blackwood including Elijah in the planning. That sounds like a good idea. She agreed. Same time next Saturday. Perfect. Blackwood hesitated, then extended his hand to Elijah. It was really good to spend time with you today. I'm looking forward to next week. Elijah regarded the offered hand solemnly, then shook it with the careful formality of a child imitating adult behavior. Me too. Thank you. For the planetarium. Kit, you're very welcome. Turning to Sarah, Blackwood's expression softened. And thank you, Miss Connolly, for facilitating today. I know this situation isn't what you expected or planned for. Elijah's well-being comes first. Sarah replied simply, Today was good for him. As they watched the Blackwood siblings depart walking to their waiting car rather than the limousines of yesterday, Sarah felt Elijah's small hand slip into hers. "He's not what I thought a dad would be like," Elijah observed thoughtfully. "Oh, what did you expect?" Elijah considered this seriously. "I don't know. Someone louder, maybe, more like the dads on TV who always know what to do and say. He seems kind of nervous." "I think he is nervous," Sarah acknowledged. "Being a parent is a big responsibility, and he's just starting to learn how to do it." "Like you were at first?" Elijah asked, surprising her with his perception. Double quotes, "Yes, exactly. Like that. When you first came to stay with me, I was nervous too. Afraid of making mistakes or saying the wrong thing." Elijah processed this information as they walked to Sarah's car. "I think he likes space stuff for real, not just pretending because I do." "I think so too." Sarah agreed. That seemed genuine, and he said we could research space tourism. Elijah continued, excitement creeping into his voice. "Do you think he really meant it?" "I think he did," Sarah said, ignoring the twist of emotion that accompanied the thought of Elijah making plans. That didn't include her. "He seems like someone who keeps his promises." As they drove home, Elijah chattering about black holes and meteorites, Sarah found herself in the strange position of hoping Thomas Blackwood was indeed a man of integrity, that the genuine interest he'd shown in his son today wasn't merely novelty or obligation, but the beginning of real commitment. Because if Elijah was going to lose his place in her home, if legal realities eventually required the transition, then he deserved a father who would love him completely, who would put his needs above all else, who would protect his sensitive heart with the same fierce dedication Sarah felt. Anything less would be another abandonment, another betrayal in a young life that had already seen too many. Later that night, after they had assembled the planetarium kit and watched it project stars across Elijah's bedroom ceiling, after stories and goodnight hugs, Sarah returned to the living room to find a text message waiting on her phone. Unknown number. "Miss Connolly. This is Thomas Blackwood. I wanted to thank you again for today. Elijah is an extraordinary child, thoughtful and intelligent beyond his years. I recognize that is largely due to your care these past weeks. I know our situation is unusual, but I hope we might find a way forward that honors his attachment to you while allowing me to become part of his life. Would you be amenable to meeting sometime this week, just the two of us, to discuss Elijah's future more candidly than lawyers and court documents allow?" Sarah stared at the message for a long time, weighing possibilities and risks. A private meeting meant vulnerability, revealing her fears, her hopes, her fierce love for a child who was not legally hers. But it also offered opportunity, the chance to understand this man who had suddenly become central to their lives, to gauge his sincerity, to advocate for Elijah's needs outside the adversarial framework of courtrooms and custody agreements. Finally, she typed her response, "Mr. Blackwood, thank you for today as well. Elijah enjoyed himself, which is what matters most. I agree that a private conversation might be beneficial. Perhaps coffee on Tuesday. I have a break between shifts at the hospital from 2 to 3 p.m. His response came almost immediately. "Tuesday at 2 p.m. is perfect. There's a cafe called Magnolia's 2 blocks from Memorial General, quiet enough for conversation. And please, call me Thomas." Sarah set down her phone, gazing at the starlight, still visible beneath Elijah's door. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, explaining today's visit to Marcus during Elijah's therapy session, navigating the curious questions of colleagues who'd glimpsed the Blackwood limousines outside her home, beginning the emotional preparation for whatever changes lay ahead. But tonight, Elijah slept peacefully beneath projected stars, secure in the knowledge that he was wanted, that adults were working together for his benefit rather than fighting over him. For now, that would have to be enough. As Sarah headed to her own bedroom, she paused outside Elijah's door, hearing his even breathing. "Sweet dreams, my boy." She whispered, "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together."